Welcome to Mayor Brown's Tech Talks podcast. Each podcast is designed to provide insights on legal issues relating to technology transactions and keep you up to date on the latest trends in data, digital, outsourcing, and software by drawing on the perspectives of practitioners who have executed technology transactions around the world. You can subscribe to this series on all major podcasting platforms. We hope you enjoy the program.
Hello, and welcome to Tech Talks. Our topic today is something we're calling Cloud Plus Strategic Partnerships. This is a new and important development in the public cloud platform market, in which large cloud providers like AWS, Microsoft, Google, IBM, and others are seeking to take cloud services upstream by working with clients in particular sectors and industries to offer more sophisticated and tailored platforms and services. So this is more than just offering premium cloud services. It's a way that cloud providers can capture market share by combining cloud and their higher value products, services, and tools with contributions from clients such as industry knowledge, technology, and data. So this is what we're talking about today. I'm excited. I'm your host, Julian Dibbell. I am a senior associate in Mayor Brown's technology transactions practice. I'm joined today by Brad Peterson, Rohith George, and Rebecca Eisner. Brad, Rohith, and Rebecca are all partners in our global technology transactions practice. Between the three of them, they have many, many years of experience helping companies navigate the cloud space. So, Brad, why don't you tell us what we're seeing out there? What is the tech transactions practice observing around this new development, Cloud Plus Strategic Transformation?
Thanks, Julian, and hello, everyone. Julian, what we're seeing is that competition among the cloud platform providers is fierce as they scramble for market share now. The cloud platform providers are aggressively working to lock in long-term relationships, moving themselves from a 30-day cancelable sort of service to more of the customer for life model that has been so successful for companies like SAP, Oracle, and other ERP software companies. One vector for cloud providers has been to bundle key products and services like AI and other tools with their basic cloud offering to attract and retain cloud subscribers. Those increase the technological connectedness between cloud companies and their customers, and they work across the customer base. However, to pursue the major relationships, the cloud providers are seeking to add contractual connections through strategic partnerships with large companies. In a strategic partnership, what we call a Cloud Plus strategic partnership, the cloud provider collaborates with a customer to develop new products and services for a new industry platform that leverages cloud services. The provider may even offer joint go-to-market opportunities that combine the provider's digital skills and the customer's data and industry expertise. That may allow the customer to gain revenue from its competitors and actually define the fundamental platform for its industry around the customer's strengths. It may give the customer a critical competitive edge through access to industry data. In any case, it tightens the customer's technological and contractual connections to the cloud provider. We call these Cloud Plus strategic partnerships. Cloud Plus strategic partnerships resemble joint ventures in many respects, but generally without forming a jointly owned legal entity. While a Cloud Plus strategic partnership may provide many advantages to the cloud customers, they raise novel technical, operational, financial, business, and yes, legal issues.
Okay, well, a lot of issues, and we definitely want to get into those. But before we do, maybe we could get a sense of a concrete sense of what these deals are like. Rohith, can you give us an example of one of these deals?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. But first, I wanted to echo Brad's point about competition being a driving factor in this trend. Companies have been turning to cloud computing solutions for more than a decade, and this trend really only accelerated through 2021 with the shift to remote work and the increasing reliance on cloud infrastructure and cloud tools to collaborate and get work done. And in this mix, you have a host of SaaS software as a service providers competing for market share. Salesforce, Oracle, SAP, Workday, Adobe, so many others. But you also have your major cloud, public cloud providers like AWS, Microsoft Azure, Google Cloud. And customers who are looking to buy cloud services are faced with a few different challenges. One, they want to avoid vendor lock-in. Two, they want to hedge their bets against any major outages. And three, they really want to find the best functionality for the particular purpose they have in mind. So, for example, the best collaboration tool possible, regardless of whether it's Microsoft's or Google's or otherwise. This all leads customers to a multi-cloud solution where our organizations are making use of services from multiple cloud providers. And if you're a leading cloud provider, you can either try to resist this, build up walled gardens, try to lock in your customers the old-fashioned way, or you can try to lean into the trend and find other ways to be sticky, other ways to sell as many of your solutions as possible. And I think that's the trend that we're seeing here. The leading public cloud providers are getting more creative in selling their solutions. And one of the ways is through these types of Cloud Plus strategic partnership packages that, as Brad mentioned, we've been seeing more and more of. So, to get back to your original question, let's say you're an auto manufacturer and the next frontier for you is competing with Tesla to build a smart vehicle that's continuously collecting, analyzing, transmitting, receiving data. If a leading cloud provider comes to you and tells you that they'll collaborate with you to help develop this technology, leveraging their oftentimes world-leading machine learning, AI, and data analytics expertise. But as long as you agree to purchase a certain minimum volume of cloud business from them over the next 5, 7, 10 years, well, that's a pretty enticing opportunity. You almost have to explore it, and for both sides, it can be a significant win-win. And this is happening across cloud providers, across industries, in healthcare and the automotive industry and insurance. And in my opinion, it's resulting in some really interesting and exciting partnerships and collaborations.
Okay, so the big platform cloud providers and some managed services or private cloud providers are combining a somewhat commoditized service, cloud platform, with higher value strategic services like tools, analytics, some bespoke consulting services, and all generally aimed at enabling a customer to offer something different and better and to provide a competitive advantage to the customer in the customer's market, right? So what are some of the high level legal and business considerations then that customers need to consider in this type of partnership, a cloud plus strategic partnership?
The 4 key considerations in any strategic partnership apply here: contributions, decision rights, sharing of risk and reward, and exit. But I'd highlight a couple of key high-level legal and business considerations. First, the provider is a potential competitor for almost any customer interested in digital transformation. Listeners to this podcast are, of course, aware of the increasing array of products and services from major cloud providers, even in sectors with very high regulatory walls, such as healthcare, financial services, and, as Rohith mentioned, automobiles. Second, the cloud provider is generally proposing a long-term technology commitment, 5-10 years, in a time when technologies, including cloud, are changing rapidly. Third, for most customers, this is a move from a cloud service that they took on as a low-cost way to do non-essential tasks like data analytics or value-added websites, to using the cloud as a fundamental part of the way they run their businesses. Companies have long accepted the loss of control and transparency that comes with cloud services, and in exchange for the benefits of low cost for non-essential functions. But a long-term commitment for essential functions can make a Cloud Plus strategic partnership a C-level strategic decision. Fourth, there is a substantial risk of failure. In the IT industry, it's commonly understood that IT projects fail regularly. They fail entirely, they're late, they're over budget, or they're significantly undervalued. Some estimates indicate that true success is an exception at best. Also, joint ventures are well known to be a 50-50 proposition at best. And finally, there is potentially a tremendous first mover advantage, and there are reasons to jump toward this. Technology is notably a winner-takes-all game, and arguably there are only a few deals to be done at all in any space in the Cloud Plus strategic partnership arena.
Okay, so Brad, you've just taken us through some very high-level strategic considerations around these relationships. Let's get down now into the actual legal agreements that form the basis of these relationships. And there's, as I understand, there's going to be two key agreements: the cloud services agreement coming from the services coming from the provider, and then the partnership agreement itself. Can we talk a bit now about some of the key business considerations in the partnership agreement? Rohith?
Yeah, sure. I think a gating item is making sure that both sides define their business objectives very clearly up front. What does each side want to receive from this relationship? Those objectives then should guide the legal structure and the key issues for the strategic partnership contract. For example, let's say the cloud provider and its customer are looking to create a mutually exclusive relationship in an industry or field or for a product or service. That will drive, a number of important business terms and considerations, like when might exclusivity be waived or terminated? How will financial commitments and other obligations change once exclusivity expires? And even if there is no, express exclusivity, if the customer is required to make financial commitments for the consumption of a minimum amount of or volume of cloud services, does that effectively bind the customer to something like exclusivity while the provider is free to develop similar opportunities with other competitors of the client? This is all just one example, but ultimately the business objectives have to drive the contractual terms and protections in the strategic partnership agreement. But some other business drivers, since you asked, to keep in mind. First, what are the products, services, and platforms that the parties intend to create? Who are the intended users and customers? In my prior example, if we're developing a connected vehicle together, we're probably selling that to the auto manufacturer's customers. If we're instead developing a connected vehicle platform that you can license to other auto manufacturers, that's a little trickier. We should define those rights up front. Second, are there other industry parties that will need to collaborate with in order to make the partnership successful? Do you need data from other sources, as an example, to make the whole thing work? Who's responsible for going and getting that data or going and getting that relationship? Third, how are the parties planning to, go to market with the product? And if so, which markets? What are the rules of engagement around that, go-to-market strategy? Fourth, what are the financial, commitments, the personnel commitments, technology commitments, et cetera, that each party will make to the other regarding the overall strategic partnership? We should make sure those are clearly defined in the agreement. Fifth, will the parties be sharing, revenues or royalties from this collaboration? If so, how are they accounting to each other for those revenues and royalties, defining those mechanics? And last but not least, how will the parties govern the relationship? Strategic partnership is in the name, but what does that really mean when decisions have to be made? Define who's on the governance committees, what's the cadence for how they meet, what types of decisions they have the authority to make, and so on. All these are key business questions that ultimately have to be hashed out and then defined for the contract.
Okay, and what are some of the legal considerations then for a client in these strategic partnerships? Rebecca?
Well, Julian, there are probably too many to address in this podcast, but we can talk about a few of the more challenging areas. Building on some of the concepts that Rohith talked about, defining in and then protecting the contributions that the parties will make is really a key part of creating one of these Cloud Plus strategic partnerships. You need to appropriately define and protect those contributions. The customer, for example, will bring know-how, intellectual property, data, sometimes people, and certainly industry knowledge. And in many Cloud Plus strategic partnership relationships, the cloud provider is really bringing its kind of one-to-many technology and platform, its analytical expertise, some tools, but the customer is really bringing the goods, I say in quotes, that really turns generic technology into potentially an industry-leading platform or product or service. So, you know, the know-how that customer personnel who work on these strategic partnerships is really important. The data is critical, and we'll talk about data in more detail. The key business processes that the customer may bring, and other industry knowledge generally. These are kind of the real jewels in the relationship. And the customer has to think about those jewels and how to protect them, how to put fences around them in terms of appropriate use and further distribution, further commercialization that the cloud provider might want to make with those jewels. So, you know, defining those types and levels of contribution in some detail is really important in the strategic partnership agreement. Another really important topic, of course, is talking about the intellectual property that will be created in one of these strategic partnerships. Now, you know, in many of these partnerships, each party kind of brings its own intellectual property or IP to the party, and they get to continue to own that. The contract typically states that's the case. And oftentimes, if somebody is going to chain off of that or build derivatives, the original owning party, the original contributor, will get to own those derivatives as well. But for newly arising IP, that truly new innovation that gets created through the joint effort of both parties in this strategic partnership, that's where the rubber hits the road and where the parties really have to think about how they're going to define their rights. Is one or the other party going to be an owner, or are they going to potentially jointly own the IP? And what are the implications of that if they both become owners of the IP? So typically a cloud provider is going to want to own anything that even remotely touches on its business or its existing products and services. And that's to be expected. That is their core business. Clients will want ownership or very broad license rights in anything that they help to develop that provides a competitive advantage for the client's core business. And, you know, it would be great if these things fit into distinct buckets, and negotiation of these rights would be a lot easier. But unfortunately, there's typically a whole lot of overlap between improving the cloud provider's tool set or AI solutions or whatever they bring, and then the client's own unique contribution, those jewels that I was mentioning. So to use Rohith's auto example, a cloud provider may bring analytical skills and tools, but maybe the auto customer manufacturer is the one who knows what types of data come from the vehicles and what those data mean. So for example, when a vehicle is giving off a signal regarding an axle, you know, axle is out of balance. Is that data actionable? Is that something that should be acted on? When should a maintenance message be sent in relation, and to whom should that go? And when does the aggregate of multiple signals like this across multiple vehicles become potentially a product recall or something that you might have to report to a regulator? A cloud provider that, you know, wants to build an industry-wide platform, maybe for the auto industry, will of course push to own the AI solution built with this special industry knowledge that the customers brought. But for the auto manufacturer, that solution may touch on trade secrets and competitive advantages that the manufacturer doesn't want to give up. So you can see the challenge that exists in defining rights around the IP that comes out of this joint collaboration. And the last topic I'll touch on, because as I said, there are many when you're talking about legal issues, but this one is critically important as the contributions and the intellectual property, is the data itself. So many cloud providers seek cloud relationships, and in particular, these cloud plus strategic partnerships, to get access to data. Data is incredibly valuable. It has become one of the crown jewels among the jewels that I spoke about earlier. So data from a customer can help to improve core products that the cloud provider wants to offer. It can assist in creating better and new products, and it can enhance AI solutions. In some cases, data can also inform a provider about entry into the client's or the customer's own industry. I think this is something that Brad alluded to above about the risk that your cloud provider decides that your market is so attractive that, and they've learned a lot from you and others, that they decide this is great business to be in. I think we'll go into it. So the customer has to carefully consider appropriate uses and prohibited uses of the data that it brings into the strategic partnership. And it can protect this data through contractual terms and occasionally through other protections like encryption when that's appropriate. And if certain data and algorithms that the customer wants to bring are extremely proprietary, we've even seen instances of customers keeping them out of a cloud platform altogether. Maybe working with the cloud provider and other providers, the customer will create a walled garden around that data or those proprietary models and only have them be accessed externally outside of the cloud and in their own proprietary system. We see this a lot, for example, with proprietary credit and financial scoring models and decisioning platforms that we see in the financial and insurance industries. There's also other important legal terms that we don't really have time to cover in any depth in this podcast, but they would include things like ongoing responsibility for legal compliance. That's very important, particularly with respect to AI solutions. Termination and unwinding rights, as Brad mentioned above, and of course, how the parties are going to allocate liability for the platforms, the products, and the services that they're bringing into the strategic partnership. So there are a whole host of considerations here.
Okay, Rohith, let's talk a little bit about the exclusivity and minimum revenue commitments that are part of these relationships. What are some of the watch-outs for clients who commit to exclusivity with their Cloud Plus strategic transformation partner? Are there any ways to limit risk regarding exclusivity or ways to obtain relief? And then about revenue commitments. If a client has a large revenue commitment to a cloud provider, can't that act as a kind of exclusivity obligation, tying the client to the cloud provider from a practical, if not a legal standpoint?
Yeah, great question. Let me start with the revenue commitments first, so backwards. Generally the core of the commercial deal for these types of partnerships is that in conjunction with the agreement to partner on the strategic transformation part of the deal, the parties execute this cloud agreement that has certain minimum revenue commitments. You're not obligated to purchase any specific cloud product necessarily. Maybe you are, but whichever ones you choose, they need to add up to these minimum thresholds by year 1, 2, 3, and so on. Oftentimes, the cloud provider will also agree to provide discounts from its rates in exchange for this commitment. And we do sometimes see providers float the idea of exclusivity in the cloud services part of the deal, but as I mentioned earlier, these providers are aware that the world is moving toward multi-cloud solutions, so that what we see more commonly, especially in this cloud service agreement part of the deal, are these minimum revenue commitments. And as you pointed out, if the revenue commitments are high enough, they can work almost as an exclusivity commitment. So, the key issues here for the customer are twofold. One, they want to make sure that these thresholds are sized appropriately for the present and the future, given their overall multi-cloud strategy or objective. Having a minimum commitment that's so large that it marries you to one provider for all of your cloud services may or may not align with those goals. Two, you want to make sure that the agreement clearly defines the performance requirements that justify these minimum commitments, and then the conditions under which those minimum commitments would be lifted. And this may involve not just performance under the cloud agreement part of the deal, hitting your SLAs, maintaining uptime, et cetera, but also tying together the performance obligations and the collaboration part of the deal. Completing transformation objectives there, hitting key milestones and thresholds, and so on. And this is an overall theme. I think these cloud plus strategic partnership deals are often structured as two different agreements, but if the reason you as a customer entered into a long-term cloud deal with significant minimum commitments is because of promises that were made regarding a potentially transformative partnership, then from the customer's perspective, at least, you need to carefully consider how to link these 2 points across the two different contract documents.
Okay, so yeah, let's focus in on the other side of this equation. We've been talking a lot about the partnership side. What about the cloud services themselves? Is there anything, Brad, that clients should consider in the cloud master agreement if they separately contract for cloud plus strategic transformation? I mean, should these two, they're different commercial arrangements, should they be linked?
Yes, the cloud services contract absolutely should be reconsidered in light of the strategic relationship. Generally, the customer signed a cloud services contract quite possibly years before the partnership was considered. And that cloud services contract was assuming that it was for tactical services. So strategic uses increase the value to the customer of securing a long-term commitment to the services that the customer needs at acceptable performance levels at a reasonably certain price in order to deliver the goals of the strategic partnership. Often the core elements of a commercial contract, product, price, and performance levels, are defined only through URL links that the provider can change at its discretion. So let's take an example. Cloud providers generally ask for the right to suspend, deprecate, or discontinue services. As Rebecca noted, it's a one-to-many offering, so they need to run a platform for the whole group of customers. But of course, as a Cloud Plus strategic partner, the customer's needs differ from other customers. Any suspension or termination that might be an annoyance to most customers might have a severe adverse impact or even undercut the fundamental purposes for which you entered into the partnership agreement. There are, of course, legitimate reasons for a provider suspending services, ensuring the integrity of the platform or the security of the platform, for example. But the Cloud Plus strategic customer will want this right to be in the narrowest terms possible with a high degree of transparency and the fastest possible recovery. Similarly, the provider will likely want the right to change or remove features or even products. Obviously, it's a bad outcome, at least for the customer, if the partnership is built on a feature or product that's discontinued or terminated. And so you might consider, for example, a longer notice period, a limitation on rights to change products, and a requirement that the cloud provider, not the customer, funds a transition caused by the cloud provider deprecating or discontinuing some critical service or some function fails to perform as required to allow the strategic partnership to be successful. Similarly, a cloud provider might ask for a wide range of termination rights for breaches, including some sort of an extensive acceptable use policy that the provider can change in its discretion. Again, if you're a customer, You put the crown jewels into this. You are relying on this platform. You cannot have a simple termination of this deal. You need a commitment to a smooth exit from the cloud provider's services in the event of a termination, including a substantial period where the cloud provider doesn't erase your data, the customer has the right to make continued use of the platform, and the cloud provider agrees to reasonably assist the customer in transitioning its operations that are now on the cloud provider's platform, including perhaps that jointly created strategic initiative, onto some other cloud platform so that the value can be preserved by the customer as intended by the strategic partnership.
Well, thank you, Brad. Thank you also, Rebecca and Rohith. We appreciate your insights. Listeners, if you have any questions about today's episode or an idea for an episode that you'd like to hear about anything related to technology transactions and the law, please email us at techtransactions@mayorbrown.com. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.
We hope you enjoyed this program. You can subscribe on all major podcasting platforms. To learn about other Mayor Brown audio programming, visit mayorbrown.com/podcasts. Thanks for listening.